How's it going, everyone? I'm Talon Cape, and today I'm going to give you my analysis on how the narrative, mechanics, and overall design work together to convey the story of Bloodborne. As always, I've converted my script into subtitles for this video, so if you want to watch the video with accurate subtitles, then please enable them down below. The Souls series has one fundamental design concept. Nothing is given, everything is earned. It's obvious how the gameplay does this, but what's fascinating is how the series has even managed to achieve this with its story. The story isn't handed to you on a cutscene platter. You have to examine the item descriptions, level design, and gameplay mechanics in order to earn the story. I know I'm kind of late to the party, and there have been a bunch of other interpretations for Bloodborne already published. Out of all of them, I'd say that the most popular ones would be Redgrave's The Pale Blood Hunt and VaatiVidya's Bloodborne Story Explained video. I agree with them on some things, and I respectfully disagree with them on others. In order to highlight the differences of my interpretation from the mainstream ones, I'll be referencing Redgrave and VaatiVidya's interpretations a few times throughout this video. I'll also be referencing Future Press's official guidebook because I think it contains a lot of useful information in understanding the lore of Bloodborne. This analysis will take a chronological look at Bloodborne's story and will be divided into two main parts. First, I'll be taking you through the story chronologically and explaining why I interpreted each aspect of the story in a certain way. In the second part, I'll talk about a few of the side stories I came across in the game. Information that doesn't really fit into the overarching story, but it's still interesting. Anyway, this video will contain a lot of story spoilers, so if you haven't finished the game, then you may not want to watch this video. The table of contents is about to go off screen, but you can also find it in the description down below. Like any Souls game, Bloodborne's story doesn't begin in the present, it begins in the past. In fact, I think the story of Bloodborne begins several thousand years ago. There's an item you find in Cainhurst called the Vile Blood Register, and it has been kept throughout the ages. An age is about 1,000 years or so, and since the Vile Bloods were only established after blood healing was discovered, then I think it's fair to say that Bloodborne's story spans over a very long period of time. However, Bloodborne's story doesn't begin with the scholars of Byrgenwerth. It begins thousands of years before them as well. It begins in an ancient desert land known as Loran. Many fans believe that Loran was some kind of homeland for the Pthumerians, but I only partially agree with that. I think it's possible that there may have been some Pthumerians living in Loran. It's possible that some of them were just living in a nearby different land. However, what I'm sure of is that there were regular human beings living in Loran. The basic story of what happened in the land of Loran is similar to what happened in Gehrman. The people of Loran practiced blood healing, which eventually caused the Scourge of the Beast that led to the end of their civilization. In the present, the only remains of Loran are Loran Chalice dungeons, so what little information we can collect is from them. There's an enemy known as the Loran Cleric, found exclusively in the Loran Chalice dungeons. Going by its name, I think it's fair to say that Loran even had its own healing church. There also seem to be certain beasts that were specific to Loran, as they have Loran in their name. The Loran Silver Beast, the Loran Dark Beast, but there's one other beast which I think is specific to Loran, the Abhorrent Beast. Out of all the Chalice dungeons, he can only be found in the Loran Chalice dungeons. So yeah, I think he really is from Loran, although he doesn't have Loran in his name. Now, the important thing about the Loran beasts is what they have in common: bolt attacks. I think that plays a significant part in the story, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Some of you may be wondering why I believe the people of Loran were regular humans. The answer lies in an NPC we meet in the game. According to the guidebook, this guy is called the Afflicted Beggar. However, he doesn't look like a beggar that fits into Bloodborne's Victorian England setting. He looks more like some medieval Arab Indian beggar. And that's significant because aren't Arabs, Indians usually associated with desert places like Loran? What's also telling is how this guy can turn into an abhorrent beast, a type of a Loran beast, and is still able to retain his ability to talk like a human. It looks like he's a surviving descendant from the people of Loran. Since the Scourge Beast has been in his people for so long, I wouldn't be surprised if the later generations of the people of Loran evolved with their beasthood and were able to meld the human and beastly aspect together. Anyway, the fall of Loran involved more than just the Scourge of Beasts. It also had a lot to do with the Great Ones. Judging by their alien-like appearance, I think it's fair to say that the original home of the Great Ones was the cosmos. I don't think they had any specific planet or anything which they resided on. All of outer space was their home. While the Great Ones were powerful and knowledgeable, there was one thing that they didn't have: The one thing that they didn't have were lasting children. Eventually, all the Great One's children would die. Yes, I said die. The Great One's children are never stated to specifically die anywhere in the game, but items like the 1/3 of the umbilical cord do state that the Great Ones will eventually lose their children. And I'm fairly sure lose in this context means die, judging by the interview that Miyazaki gave in the guidebook. He compared the Great Ones losing their children to how developed societies have fewer children. However, I don't think that necessarily means that only infant Great Ones died of natural causes. It's possible some of them were killed by something. Before we go any further, I should clarify a concept known as the Dreaming World, for anyone who doesn't know. Redgrave explained all of this in the Pale Blood Hunt. Bloodborne takes a lot of inspiration from the works of Lovecraft, and in Lovecraft stories, dreams were an alternate dimension which people could visit. Dreams seem to have a similar function in Bloodborne, since we can travel to the Hunter's Dream and come back with weapons and items obtained from there. I think there's a bit more to the dreams in Bloodborne, but I'll get to that soon. Anyway, the Great Ones eventually made contact with the people of Loran, seeking surrogates for their lost children. Now, I think there's more to this contact than it may initially seem. How exactly did the Great Ones make contact with the people of Loran? The obvious answer would be that they descended from the cosmos and landed on Loran. However, according to the Isru Chalice, there was this land known as Is, which lies in contact with the cosmos. This land allowed the Great Ones to function on transcendental planes of thought. Transcendental means beyond the physical realm, and to me that implies that the land of Is wasn't just a physical land. I think Is was a land in the dreaming world. This would fit in with how the Great Ones were said to function on planes of thought, as a dream can be thought of as a plane of thought. It's true that in the present there is a physical Is Chalice dungeon, but I think that was made as more of a memento to the dreaming world of Is. Is was where the Great Ones made contact with the people of Loran. Additionally, I don't think Is was a physical land because we don't really find any artifacts from any kind of civilization in Is, but for Loran we do have items like the Bastard of Loran. I think it makes sense for the Great Ones to descend from the cosmos into the dream of someone from Loran. I mean, that's what we see with the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence descends from the cosmos into the Hunter's Dream. We never really see a Great One descend from the cosmos into the physical world, which the doll refers to as the waking world. However, there are Great Ones in the waking world, so how did they arrive there? Well, I believe that when the Great Ones are in the dreaming world, they can travel from there into the waking world. The dreaming world acts as a passageway between the waking world and the cosmos. So when the Great Ones arrived in Loran, they first traveled to the dreaming world of Is, and from there they traveled to the waking world of Loran to seek surrogate children. However, the guidebook confirms that the Great Ones don't just want any human children as their surrogates, they want special children. Now, what makes a child special is a matter of debate, but I think it's the ability of the child to create contact dreams. A contact dream is a term I use to denote a dream, which can act as a passageway between the waking world and the cosmos. Not all dreams can act as passageways because, not all dreams are even about space or the cosmos or anything like that. I think that only special children can create contact dreams. I believe the land of Is is one of the dreaming worlds. Basically, the special children need to use the mind of a host to create a contact dream, because their own minds don't have enough imagination. I guess the Great Ones want these special children because their abilities give them a connection with the cosmos that regular children just don't have. Anyway, the people of Loran wanted the eldritch wisdom of the Great Ones, so they worshipped them and were more than happy to hand over their special children. I think this became an important part of their culture, according to the Ring of Betrothal. The people of Loran were only allowed to marry if they were slated to give birth to a special child. Marriage wasn't about starting your own family, marriage was about completing the Great One's families. The people of Loran could still start their own families, but it would be out of wedlock, and that's who I think the Bastard of Loran is. He was born out of wedlock, and thus was looked down as a child. I mean, that's why he's called the Bastard of Loran. He was considered not worthy of the Great Ones, and that explains why when you use him as part of your ritual materials when conducting a chalice ritual, you end up with a cursed effect in the chalice dungeon which you create. Anyway, the Great Ones were probably able to claim many surrogates during their time in Loran. The people of Loran admired the Great Ones so much that they tried to learn how to evolve to their level. I think that some of them may have even created or evolved into celestial emissaries. Judging by their names, I guess the celestial emissaries were used to communicate with the Great Ones. Bloodborne has two main classifications for enemies, beast and kin. Celestial emissaries are kin. Beasts are simple to identify, but what defines a kin is debatable. According to the Kid Cold Blood, they're described as inhuman brethren of the Great One. I think a kin is someone who evolves to a level close to a Great One and may be accepted into the ranks of the Great Ones. The reason why I believe this is because the guidebook confirms that Ebrietas and the Celestial Emissary are both Great Ones and kin. I think it's possible to be born a kin, but it's possible to get there through evolution as well. Anyway, since the kin were too close to the Great Ones, they spent a lot of time in the land of Is. So much time that the land of Is could have even been considered their home. Anyway, everything was going fine for the people of Loran and the Great Ones. That is until the people of Loran learned about the art of blood healing from a Great One known as Udin, son of the Moon Presence. When it comes to blood healing, I think the Moon Presence is the progenitor of that technique. Everything about blood healing has been incorporated into the design of the Moon Presence. Look at the Moon Presence when you battle it. It has attacks which can prevent you from blood healing. It even has attacks which can instantly reduce your health, and that's important because in this game health is connected to blood. Not to mention, the Moon Presence has a lot in common with the beast which the users of blood healing eventually turn into. It roars like a beast, has similar attacks to the beast, and even has a similar body part healing technique that many of the beasts use. Not to mention, the Blood Moon can also blur the line between man and beast. I think the old bloods that's said to have started blood healing is the Moon Presence's blood. However, I don't think the Moon Presence directly introduced blood healing. Instead, she got her son Udin to do it because she didn't want the other Great Ones to trace blood healing back to her. The way I see it, the Moon Presence's plan is to acquire all the knowledge in the world. Yes, Great Ones are knowledgeable beings, but they don't know everything. There are some things that some Great Ones know which other Great Ones don't know. The Moon Presence wanted the other Great Ones dead so it could eventually get her hands on their blood echoes. Blood echoes are the bloody memories of those cursed by the plague of beasts. Whatever knowledge you have is locked in your memories. So I think the Moon Presence found out that if she could plague the memories of the Great Ones with the scourge of beasts, she could get them to literally drop their knowledge. This is one of the main themes you see in the game. Fear causes you to lose memories and ultimately knowledge. When you're about to die in Bloodborne, you feel fear, and after you die, you drop your blood echoes. You get the blood echoes back by standing up to your fears. By going back to where you died, not only are you able to bravely face your murderer again, but you're also given the opportunity to retrieve your blood echoes. This is also seen with the lamp teleportation mechanics. The normal Hunter's Mark will cause you to lose your blood echoes when you use it to teleport. However, if you use the Bold Hunter's Mark, it signifies your courage and allows you to keep all your blood echoes. Anyway, the Moon Presence had to think of a plan to kill all the other Great Ones, and that plan was to introduce blood healing to the people of Loran. The reason that the Moon Presence did this is because she knew what kind of beast the people of Loran would turn into. They would turn into beasts with bolt attacks. As you fight the Great Ones in the present, one thing you'll notice about them and the kin is that they all have a weakness to bolt attacks. According to the guidebook, bolt defense is one of the lowest, if not the lowest stats for many of the Great Ones. This is something about Bloodborne that isn't talked about enough. It's a concept that I call the story in stats. Basically, some of the lore is locked behind the stats of various characters, and you can only figure it out if you examine the stats and find the patterns between the different characters. The guidebook makes this easy because they just list all the stats for each enemy, but you can make reasonable discoveries on your own by just trying out different weapons on enemies. Anyway, the Moon Presence's plan to kill the other Great Ones is part of the lore that can only be understood by looking for the story in stats. One thing you'll notice about the Great Ones is that their bolt defense is pretty low, but the Loran beasts have bolt attacks. Put it together and it's not difficult to imagine what happened. Basically, the Moon Presence knew that a lot of the Great Ones were in Loran, and she knew that a lot of people in Loran would turn into Great One killing bolt-infused beasts if you just introduced blood healing to them. She probably also used the Blood Moon to accelerate the transformation of the people of Loran into beasts. The scourge of the beast in Loran began, and it killed so many Great Ones. Other Great Ones and even the kin went to Loran from the cosmos and from the dreaming world to try and stop the massacre, but it was of no use. Countless Great Ones were massacred by the Loran beasts. Even their surrogate children were shown no mercy. Only a few Great Ones actually managed to survive the Great One Massacre. Ironically, I also believe Udin was killed during this massacre, and that's why in the present-day Gehrman, there's this area known as the Tomb of Udin. Now before I go further, I'd like to explain something. I think the mainstream opinion is that Udin, and not the moon presence, is the one who started blood healing, as Udin is the one who's revered in the healing church in present-day Yharnam. However, I think the moon presence is a better fit. I think Udin was simply set up to look like the mastermind behind the Great One Massacre, so the moon presence could prevent suspicion from falling upon her. So the present-day healing church in Yharnam believe it's Udin who they should be worshipping, but they're mistaken. Some fans also seem to believe that Udin is still alive in some capacity, but I don't really agree with that. Udin has a tomb, and above all this, I don't think Udin really fits in with being a player in the present-day story of Yharnam. A lot of people like to associate Udin with blood, but that's not quite accurate. According to the Caryll ruin, the formless Udin, Udin is symbolized not by blood, but by the oozing blood. Oozing is when a fluid moves slowly, especially when it's moving through holes or a tube. We almost never see blood ooze in the entire game. Whenever we see blood, it's almost always splattering around everywhere at high speed. The only instant I can think of with blood oozing is during our initial blood ministration. So I think it's demonstrated thematically just as much literally that Udin is pretty much dead in present-day Yharnam. The idea of Udin being represented by the oozing blood is also why I'm inclined to believe that he's the moon presence's son. If the moon presence is all about blood moving fast and Udin is all about blood moving slow, then I think it would fit to have Udin, the slow bloody Great One, to be born of the moon presence, the fast bloody Great One. I also like to add that I don't think Udin is evil. According to one of the umbilical cords, it seems like he had a child which he lost, or maybe he originally came to Loran to just seek a surrogate. He was just misled by his knowledge-hungry mother, who probably didn't care when he died. So yeah, poor guy. Anyway, as the Great One Massacre raged on, the few Great Ones who hadn't been killed yet looked for a way to stop the Loran beast. They needed someone who had good bolt defense and strong fired attacks that could counter the Loran beast. Fortunately, every artist found the answer nearby. She found the Pthumerians. The Pthumerians were a race of tall, pale-skinned, humanoid figures with mostly ashen hair. However, the most important aspect of them is that they had a variety of different powers, and that's why they were considered to be superhuman beings. The Pthumerians wanted eldritch knowledge, and every artist was willing to grant it to them in exchange for them helping her. So they made a contract. The Pthumerians agreed and used their high bolt defense and fire attacks to turn the tide against the Loran beast. They killed so many of the Loran beasts that only a few survived till the present day. After the Pthumerians had defeated the Loran beast, every artist decided to grant them the eldritch knowledge. With it, the Pthumerians were able to learn of the eldritch truth and were able to use it to advance their technology to monumental levels. Items like the Shaman Bone Blade are a product of Pthumerian technology, as they're only unlocked in the shop after you acquire a lower Pthumeru chalice. However, the Pthumerians had yet to complete the terms of their contract. Their contract with every artist was not simply to stop the Loran beast, they also had to build and safeguard the tombs for the dead Great Ones. The Pthumerians were so determined to obtain eldritch knowledge that they were willing to sell their entire race into servitude to the Great Ones. I don't think that they were all very happy that they were now tomb keepers, but they still decided to honor the terms of their contract. Using the eldritch knowledge obtained from every artist, the Pthumerians set out to create Chalice Dungeon. During all this time, the moon presence was residing in the cosmos. Her plan hadn't been a complete success, as a few Great Ones had survived. These Great Ones had also employed the powerful Pthumerians to work for them, so she knew that killing these few surviving Great Ones wouldn't be easy. I think the moon presence may have tried to establish the hunters during this time, as you do find hunter symbols at several places in the Chalice Dungeons. She probably wanted them to hunt the remaining Great Ones. However, I think in the end she decided she couldn't raise any powerful hunter force at the moment. So the moon presence decided to bid its time, and waited until she could find another group of people to exploit. She was safe from it now because without any more special children, the Great Ones didn't have any way of returning to the cosmos. Before the Pthumerians began to construct the Chalice Dungeons, the surviving Great Ones told them that there was one thing that they had to prioritize above all else: security. After seeing so many of the fellow Great Ones killed, the surviving Great Ones wanted them to at least have a peaceful rest in death. Nobody other than a Great One and a Pthumerian was supposed to enter the tombs under any circumstances. The Pthumerians achieved this by making the keys to the chalice dungeon a special ritual which involves using a chalice along with blood echoes, along with ritual blood, and all these other difficult to obtain materials. The Pthumerians also had to make sure that there would be powerful guards stationed at every level of the chalice dungeons in order to stop people who may try to raid the tombs. These guards consisted of elite Pthumerian soldiers and members of the surviving Great Ones as well. Anyway, I believe the Pthumerians started out by carving out the Loran and East chalice dungeons. A few of the surviving beasts from the Scourge crept into the Loran Labyrinth, and a few of the surviving kin crept into the East Gravestone, and that's where we find it today. There was also this third area which they carved out known as the Hintertombs. And according to the Hintertomb chalices, the Hintertombs were basically just supposed to be an ongoing extension of the current chalice dungeons. But that's where the Pthumerians were supposed to stop. There were only supposed to be 3 main chalice dungeons in accordance with the Great One's wishes. However, that wasn't the case. While the first Pthumerians were pretty obedient, the Pthumerian descendants felt proud of what their ancestors had accomplished in carving out the chalice dungeons, but they wanted some of the glory for themselves. They grew proud. That's when they decided to build a new type of dungeon, the Pthumerian Labyrinths. The Pthumerian Ill Chalice makes a note about the Pthumerian pride. It describes how the initial Pthumerians were mere humble gravekeepers and how their descendants saw fit to name themselves a successor. To get a better understanding of what it's trying to say, take a look at the Pthumerian Labyrinth. It has about 12 different layers with a different chalice. This makes it a lot bigger compared to the Loran Labyrinth and the Hintertombs that have 5 layers and the East Gravestone that has 3. The Great Ones weren't happy when they found out about the Pthumerians creating their own lavish labyrinths, so they decided to punish the Pthumerians. However, they decided not to punish all the Pthumerians, but only the leader of the rebels, who I believe was Queen Gehrman. Ever since the Great One Massacre, the Great One's desire for surrogate children had only increased. There were less Great Ones than there had ever been before. They needed to pass on their legacy somehow. They needed more surrogates. However, they decided to keep their hands off the Pthumerian children because the Pthumerians had helped them out of their mess. Or at least that was the case until the Pthumerians started rebelling and building their own labyrinths. That made the Great Ones rethink their stance. They decided to punish Gehrman and her future family to set an example for all Pthumerians, and also because they wanted surrogate children. From then on, everyone with Gehrman's blood would have to give up their special children to the Great Ones as surrogates. Now, Gehrman probably thought that this was an extreme punishment. Judging by her clothes, Gehrman was probably newly wed and was looking forward to her first child when the Great Ones approached her and asked her to hand over her child. The Great Ones didn't accept any excuses. However, Gehrman still refused to hand her baby over, so the Great Ones quite literally ripped her baby from her womb. Unfortunately, that resulted in the death of her baby and Gehrman herself as well. However, since the Pthumerians were superhuman beings, Gehrman and her baby have survived as ghosts in present-day Gehrman. However, everything about Gehrman and her familial blood was tabooed as corrupted blood, and everyone warned to stay away from it. That was the case until some non-Pthumerians decided to visit the Pthumerian labyrinths for the first time. Now let's talk about Byrgenwerth. Although we're getting closer to the present now, the period of Byrgenwerth also began at least a few thousand years ago. By then, the chalice dungeons had been completely buried underneath the earth due to earth reformation, landslides, and stuff like that. They became a buried treasure of knowledge. People heard legends of how those labyrinths held the secrets to obtaining eldritch knowledge. That's why Byrgenwerth was established by Master Willem. He hoped to turn Byrgenwerth into a place of learning where men could find ways to go beyond their limit. The Pthumerians had done a great job of making entry into the chalice dungeons almost impossible, but together Willem and his student Laurence managed to conduct a chalice ritual. They were able to enter the labyrinths but faced opposition from both the Pthumerians and the Great Ones. However, the two of them were determined to continue, so they hired some tomb prospectors and continued to study the labyrinths. Together, Master Willem and Laurence made a number of discoveries in the tombs. Laurence heard of how the Loran beasts had massacred many of the Great Ones who were the harbingers of the eldritch knowledge. That's why the Healing Church in the present day considers Loran beasts and anything to do with them to be blasphemous. church attire is deliberately made to be highly resistant to bolt, because bolt attacks were considered to be dangerous as the Loran beasts utilized them. People who tried to study the Loran beasts in the healing church were also shunned. This included people like Archibald, who tried to recreate the sparks of the blasphemous Loran beasts. He was labeled an eccentric of the workshop. People like Irreverent Izzy tried to utilize the powers of the Loran beast by creating weapons like the Beast Claw and the Beast Roar, but eventually these weapons were banned. Laurence and Williams had also discovered something that radically changed the course of their research. Back then, they hadn't even encountered Ebrietas or any other Great Ones, but they found something close to them, the Augur of Ebrietas. By studying the arcane energies of this device, they were able to discover that the Great Ones weren't originally from the Earth, but from the cosmos. Thus, in their quest to evolve, Willem and Laurence decided that eventually they needed to make contact with the cosmos. However, the most important discovery that Laurence made was about blood healing. There wasn't much information about it even in the Chalice dungeons, as even the Great Ones themselves were unaware of what exactly happened during the Great One Massacre. While blood healing didn't grant knowledge, it did grant Laurence an instant way of healing himself. Dangerous research would no longer be so dangerous with blood healing. However, Willem soon grew to dislike the idea of blood healing, as he heard warnings about it from the residents of the Chalice dungeons. Unfortunately, Laurence had grown a bit overconfident. He was too bent on trying to garner knowledge through blood healing that he started to obsess over blood. He started to experience frenzy as he continued to limitlessly indulge in eldritch knowledge. His response to that was to create sedatives which would also use blood healing. He was stuck in a cycle of blood. Laurence wouldn't listen to Master Willem's warnings and eventually decided to leave him to study blood healing by himself and his small group of followers. And that was the beginning of his end. One day, Laurence traveled down the Pthumerian Labyrinth to try and find more information about blood healing. He traveled down there with a companion who also utilized blood healing. They were never seen again. Well, actually, that's not quite accurate. They were never seen as humans again. It was down in the Pthumerian Labyrinth that the blood healing finally caught up to Laurence. He was turned into the blood-starved beast. His companion managed to save himself by beheading Laurence, but quite ironically, when the companion tried to return to the surface, the effects of the old blood caught up to him as well, and he was transformed into a blood-starved beast as well. Laurence and his companions are the two blood-starved beasts that we encountered in the Pthumerian Labyrinth in the present day. When Laurence and his companions didn't return from the labyrinth, Laurence's friend Gehrman began to worry. He suspected something had happened to Laurence down there, but Gehrman himself was growing too old, and traveling to the Chalice dungeons previously had taken a toll on his body. He had to regretfully admit that he himself could not have helped Laurence, and that's something which haunts him till this day.
Oh, Laurence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid.
Fortunately, Gehrman did know of a group of young scholars from Byrgenwerth who admired Laurence and were more than happy to go look for him in the Chalice dungeons. Unfortunately, when these young scholars arrived in the Pthumerian Labyrinth, they only found Laurence's beastly skull, as the rest of Laurence's body had been hijacked by a parasite worm that had taken it away. This entire chain of events is narrated by Alfred.
Byrgenwerth is an old place of learning, and the Tomb of the Gods, carved out below Gehrman, should be familiar to every hunter. Well, once a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb. This led to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing.
I believe that these young Byrgenwerth scholars were the Laurence admirers which Gehrman hired to retrieve Laurence from the labyrinth. Of course, they only managed to find a skull, which they considered to be a holy medium. According to what Alfred says, the holy medium is what establishes blood healing, and I believe Laurence's beastly skull does that. I think the young Byrgenwerth scholars who found his skull considered Laurence to be a martyr to the cause of blood healing, and decided to continue his legacy by pushing the art of blood healing further. They portrayed Laurence as this Christ-like figure, and using that narrative, they were able to establish the Healing Church and gain a lot of followers. Initially, I think it was only Laurence and maybe a few of his followers who were practicing blood healing, After his death, the young Bürgerwehr scholars were able to popularize blood healing among the masses. Remember, it was said that the Holy Medium established blood healing rather than created blood healing, so it's fair to assume that there were people practicing blood healing before the church's inception. This is another part of the lore where I differ from both Redgrave and Vitavidia. Both of them said that they believe Ebrietas is the Holy Medium, but I don't think that's the case. Alfred states that the Holy Medium is located inside the main cathedral, but Ebrietas isn't inside the main cathedral, she's located underneath it. Additionally, I don't see how Ebrietas could have established blood healing as a popular art. I mean, she was being kept secret. Above all this, Miyazaki stated in an exclusive interview in that guidebook that Lawrence's skull served as the start of the healing church, so I interpreted that to mean that it was the Holy Medium. Now, I think that one of the most important things about the young scholars who founded the healing church is that they weren't really faithful followers of Laurence. They were more like Laurence fanboys, so it's no wonder why healing church ideology slowly became twisted over the years. However, I still think they respected Master Willem, and I do think they even trained some of the members of the Healing Church under him, and that explains why some members of the Healing Church wear eye coverings. Anyway, I'd also like to highlight what Ebrietas represented. I think Ebrietas was basically the conveyor of eldritch knowledge to those who desired it. Items like the Augur of Ebrietas, which allowed you to partially summon some of her tentacles, are described as the remnants of the eldritch truth encountered at Bürgenwerth. I think the eldritch knowledge of Ebrietas is the eldritch truth, and whenever it says eldritch truth, it's referring to her. I think Laurence or his associates did bring Ebrietas to Bürgenwerth initially, but the moment the healing church were established, the young scholars decided to move Ebrietas there. I also think the healing church was able to get some of the Pthumerians to work for them. Remember how I said the Pthumerians are tall, pale-skinned humanoids with superhuman abilities? Well, some members of the Healing Church are just like that, namely the Church Servant and the Church Giant. I guess some of the younger Pthumerians just got bored of being tomb keepers and wanted to see the outside world. Of course, the older Pthumerians remembered what happened to Gehrman when she and her followers rebelled, so they decided not to abandon their duties. According to the ailing Loran chalice, some people claimed that the next place to be destroyed by the Scourge of the Beast was going to be Yharnam. I think the people who made that claim were the older Pthumerians, who were wise enough to learn from the lessons of Loran. Before I go any further, I'd like to point out how my views from the Pthumerian history are also quite different from the mainstream ones. The mainstream view is that the Pthumerians were ravaged by their own Scourge of Beasts, which was brought about by their own blood healing. But I don't really buy that. The Pthumerians are just described as tomb keepers of the Great Ones. They're never described as a race that indulges in blood healing. I don't think there were any Scourge of the Beast that wiped out the Pthumerians. It's unlike the people of Loran, there are plenty of Pthumerians alive in present-day Yharnam. From this point on, both the Healing Church and Willem continued to try to make contact with the cosmos, but in different ways. They were essentially trying to make contact with the Moon Presence, since she's the powerful one residing in the cosmos. As Laurence was now dead, Willem was firm in his belief that insight and not old blood was the key to evolution. However, in order to do that, he needed eyes on the inside as stated in the umbilical cords. What that actually means is a matter of debate, but I think eyes on the inside represents your ability to identify the effects of the dreaming world. Cosmic entities can't physically interact with the waking world. Cosmic entities like the Great One need a dreaming world. So basically, what are dreams? They're projections inside your head, inside your brain. So eyes on the inside literally means the ability to identify how entities in the dreaming world, such as the Great Ones, can affect the waking world. For example, in the main game, we get to see and hear more Great One related stuff as our insight increases. However, I think the phrase eyes on the inside can have some literal significance as well. I think by studying eyes, we can find out how to better look within and find out more about ourselves. That's what I think Master Willem meant when he said what we need are more eyes. I think it was referring to how they needed more eye test subjects to study. Anyway, Willem's students probably agree with Willem's insight and began volunteering to do all they could to help him obtain more eyes. Willem only wanted what was the best for his students, so early on, he used the little eldritch knowledge he had to help them evolve. He basically turned them into the Garden of Eyes that we see in Bürgenwerth today. According to the guidebook, Willem used the Garden of Eyes for the cultivation of eyes. However, that's not all there is to them. The Garden of Eyes were also made to further evolve, and I think some of them got quite close to becoming Great Ones. At first, the Garden of Eyes looked like these weird, Meago, fly-like creatures that look nothing else we find in the game. But that's not true. There is another creature that bears a striking resemblance, not to the Garden of Eyes, but maybe to what they would look like if they continued to evolve for a long period of time. I'm talking about Amygdala, specifically the Amygdala we see outside Udin Chapel, at the gates of Yahar'gul, and inside Yahar'gul. I also want to highlight that there's a subtle difference between these Amygdalas and the ones we meet in the Nightmare and Chalice dungeon. These Amygdala have a Davy Jones-style tentacle beard, while the Amygdalas we meet in the Chalice dungeons and the Nightmare have none. According to the guidebook, the Amygdalas we meet on the surface are false gods. The guide doesn't really explain what that means, but it's not difficult to figure it out. The Amygdalas on the surface are former students of Byrgenwerth, which were evolved into their current tentacle-beard Amygdala-like states. They're not natural Amygdalas like the ones found in the Chalice dungeons. If you look carefully at the Garden of Eyes, you'll notice that they're evolving the features of the false god Amygdalas. For starters, they already have the Amygdala tail. We also know that the Garden of Eyes were used for the cultivation of eyes. The Amygdalas we see have their eyes stuck way back in their sockets. It looks like they've had their eyes torn out so many times that the current eyes have just naturally developed to be hidden way back in their sockets. We also see that they're starting to grow their tentacle beard a little as well. So I think there's no doubt that the Garden of Eyes became the false god Amygdala that we see today. See how these statues have a tentacle beard? That demonstrates that the Healing Church wasn't getting its followers to worship the real Great Ones, but rather imposter Great Ones. That says something about the Healing Church. The Healing Church didn't really have any true respect for the Great Ones. What I mean is that they just saw the Great Ones as a means to their end of obtaining eldritch knowledge. They're similar to people who only pray because they want God to give them something. There wasn't any true devotion towards them, and that's why the feigned successful devotion to their lords, the Healing Church got the false god Amygdalas to be part of the church. They wanted to make it look like they were close to the Great Ones when that was very far from the truth. I mean, the Great Ones didn't want anyone to enter the tomb of their dead brethren, but the Healing Church was always sending tomb prospectors down there to do raids for them. During all this time, the Moon Princess was quietly residing in the cosmos, watching over the events that unfolded in Byrgenwerth and Yharnam. Honestly, she was probably quite satisfied with what had occurred. Her blood healing was living on in a new population that wasn't on the best interests with the surviving Great Ones. Eventually, she was hoping that she could turn them into the hunters and use them to get the rest of the Great Ones' blood echoes. However, the Moon Presence ended up revealing herself sooner than expected. She was watching everyone from the cosmos, and the actions of a certain individual caused her to panic. That individual was Gehrman. Despite not being in the Chalice dungeons for a while, the Moon Presence discovered that Gehrman had obtained one of the most powerful items from the Chalice dungeons, the 1/3 of the umbilical cord. Consuming 3 of these items can set you on a path of evolution that could cause you to reach a level that even ousted the Moon Presence in her current state. At that time, Gehrman had only 1, so the Moon Presence realized that she could stop him as long as she acted before Gehrman could obtain 2 more. Since Gehrman was the only one who posed the main threat to her at the moment, the Moon Presence had to prevent him from becoming her enemy. She did this by using the Blood Moon to accelerate the priest's transformations for the blood users of the Healing Church. The sight of more and more people turning into beasts terrified Gehrman, as that reminded him of what had happened to his friend Laurence. The beasts began to wreak havoc everywhere. Initially, the Healing Church had the beasts violently slaughtered, but Gehrman didn't agree with those methods. The beasts were formerly people, so he wanted there to be a more dignified way of dealing with them. Then one night while Gehrman was sleeping in his workshop, he had a dream. The Moon Presence arrived to him in his dream and made an offer to him. She revealed she was the one who was behind the Scourge of Beasts. If Gehrman ever wanted to see her stop, he had to agree to do her bidding. Seeing no other alternative, Gehrman agreed. The Moon Presence then revealed that she would turn Gehrman's dream into the dreaming world of the Hunter's dream. Normally, only a special child would be able to create a dreaming world, but the Moon Presence had gotten the blood echoes of the dead special children in Loran, so she was able to inherit this ability from them. In the dream, Gehrman would forge his weapon and get whatever useful item he could find. Since it was Gehrman's dream, then everything in it was a projection of stuff from Gehrman's mind. The doll, for example, was a doll that Gehrman had created in real life as a doll maker. In order to forge his weapon, Gehrman needed material, and the Moon Presence granted his request by having cosmic material fall from the cosmos into the Hunter's dream. Gehrman used it to forge a weapon that he found fitting of his methodology in dealing with the beast. A masterpiece that defined the entire array of weapons crafted at the workshop. Its blade is forged with cyrite, said to have fallen from the heavens. Gehrman surely saw the hunt as a dirge of farewell, wishing only that his prey might rest in peace, never again to awaken to another harrowing nightmare. According to Gehrman's hunter attire, he didn't do anything special for his combat uniform, he just made a couple of quick adjustments to his everyday clothes. He didn't want anything heavy as he wanted to quickly put an end to beasts, so they would feel as little pain as possible. This was the Moon Presence's plan to get Gehrman to work for her. It was somewhat summarized in the item description of the 1/3 of the umbilical cord. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the Pale Moon, which beaconned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. From then on, Gehrman operated in secret, taking out any blood users that turned into beasts. He also kept his identity as a secret from the Healing Church, because he was interfering with their experiments. Despite the disastrous effects of the blood healing turning blood users into beasts, the Healing Church didn't want to stop its research or anything. They just deemed the sacrifices had to be made in order to search for the eldritch truth. After Gehrman grew old and died, he began taking apprentices. Since the Moon Presence needed a steady supply of blood echoes, Gehrman was only allowed to have one apprentice for each night of the hunt. They were each tasked to kill beasts, kin, and the best of them even managed to kill a few of the surviving Great Ones in the Chalice dungeons. At the end of their hunt, Gehrman would free them from the hunter's dream by executing them. However, I don't think execution was the sole way of breaking the link between a hunter and the hunter's dream. I mean, what if a hunter went rogue and decided to stop listening to Gehrman halfway through the hunt? I think there were other ways of disconnecting a hunter from the hunter's dream, but Gehrman was required to use execution because of what execution does. Think about what happens when you're killed by an enemy in the game. You drop all your blood echoes. Since the hunt was all about getting blood echoes for the Moon Presence, Gehrman needed to kill you in order to force you to drop your blood echoes. After your character dies in the hunter's dream, I think the Moon Presence comes down to collect your blood echoes. In the game, we only see the Moon Presence descend after we kill Gehrman, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the Moon Presence always comes down to the hunter's dream after Gehrman kills a hunter. So even after your character is killed in the Yharnam Sunrise ending, I think the Moon Presence did descend to the hunter's dream to collect all our blood echoes, although we didn't get to see that scene. In a way, the hunter's dream is also a test for Gehrman. The Moon Presence wanted a steady supply of blood echoes. That's why Gehrman was required to constantly execute his hunters. That way, the Moon Presence got more blood echoes at the end of each night of the hunt. The Moon Presence also wanted to be discreet in her methods in order to not warn the other Great Ones who probably thought she was dead. However, I think there was another reason why she decided to have one hunter to be assigned to Gehrman for each night. The night of the hunt wasn't just a test for hunters, but also a test for Gehrman himself. Gehrman had to constantly prove that he was the right person to act as a guide for the hunters. If any of the hunters became independent, then Gehrman had to prove his strength by taking out the hunter that he raised. The Moon Presence only wanted the very best to work for her, and that's why if Gehrman was ever defeated, she decided to replace him with the hunter that defeated him. It's clear that Gehrman didn't like working in the hunter's dream, but since nobody better came, he had no choice but to continue. He couldn't leave beast hunting to some incompetent hunter. I'd also like to add that I'm not sure what the criteria for a night to be the night of the hunt was, but I think it was just decided that a certain night should be the night of the hunt when the Moon Presence wanted more blood echoes. I mean, the Moon Presence obtained knowledge via blood echoes during the end of each night of the hunt. She relished in her newfound knowledge depending on how interesting it was. After she was done, she yearned for more and called for another night of the hunt. If the blood echoes she had received were just from regular beasts, then I'm guessing she immediately called for another night, but if they were from surviving Great Ones, then I'm guessing it will be quite a while before she called for another night of the hunt. The more I think about it, the more the Moon Presence seems like a metaphor for the player. Like the Moon Presence, the player wants knowledge when they start Bloodborne, so the player goes about killing beasts to try and explore and understanding the world, which is also very similar to the Moon Presence. As the game goes on, the player wants more blood echoes, also just like the Moon Presence. They want more blood echoes so they can do more and see more interesting things, just like the Moon Presence. There's even a recurring idea that the player's character has an inner beast within them despite the normally well thought out method of combat they employ. Items like the beast roar and gameplay techniques like the visceral attacks also cause the player character to do things that are reminiscent of the moon presence's beast-like behavior. It's no wonder that a player's character is denoted as a moon-scented or a moonlit hunter. Thousands of years passed with Gehrman training hunters. Most of them were pretty loyal, and Gehrman was sorry to see them go at the end of the hunt. However, no teacher can only have good students, and it wasn't long until Gehrman encountered his own rogue students. As stated in the description of the burial blade, Gehrman saw the hunt as a dirge of a farewell. It was a necessary evil. It was something that had to be done swiftly and regrettably because the ones who were killed were mostly innocent people. However, Gehrman soon got an apprentice who didn't respect that idea. Instead, they saw the hunt as this playful activity where the hunter is supposed to have fun by using fancy weapons to take out beasts in lavish styles. This hunter was the first powder keg. The powder keg's adoration of complex design and big booms culminated in weapon designs that contrasted with those traditionally of the workshop. The late powder kegs, bless their souls, had a motto: if a weapon ain't got kick, it just ain't worth it. Gehrman was disappointed with the attitude of the first powder keg, so he refused to let him hunt further and kicked him out of the hunter's dream. However, that wasn't the end of the powder kegs. The first powder keg decided to continue as a powder keg in the waking world and probably recruited Yarnamites and whoever else he could find to come join him. Gehrman's following apprentice was a man named Jura. Jura's Ashen Hunter set gives us some important information about him. Jura is known through his contact with the powder kegs, the heretics of the workshop. He is said to have both uncommonly kind and dreadfully foolish. I believe Jura's kindness is what initially caught Gehrman's eyes when he was looking for a new hunter. Unlike the first powder keg, Gehrman wanted someone very kind who could sympathize with the beast. However, when Gehrman first met Jura, he realized that Jura had so much kindness that his kindness tipped into foolishness. Jura was someone who was determined to never kill a fellow human being. He could regretfully kill beasts, but he firmly believed that anything that could be reasoned with should be reasoned with. Gehrman knew that Jura would only work for him as long as he was unaware that the beasts he were killing were once human beings, so Gehrman hid that information from Jura. So Jura began the hunt. However, it wasn't long until he came into contact with the powder kegs. Gehrman had warned him not to join the powder kegs, but Jura's foolish level of kindness kicked in when he met them. He decided they weren't that bad and that Gehrman had just been too hard on them. He secretly joined the powder kegs. He wasn't the biggest fan of how the powder kegs killed beasts, but Jura thought that the beasts were no different from the animals which he ate, so it didn't matter that much to him. However, it wasn't long until Jura's opinion drastically changed. During that time, there was this disease in old Yharnam called Ashen Blood. The people tried to treat it with antidote, but that only provided temporary relief, and it wasn't long until the Ashen Blood ailment returned. The healing church administered a lot of blood healing in order to quell the Ashen Blood. It may have worked, but then a bigger problem arose. The blood moon was still out. In fact, the blood moon had been shining over Yharnam every night ever since the moon presence had employed Gehrman as the first hunter. The healing church knew that if they administered blood healing in such large quantities to the population of old Yharnam, then they would all be swiftly turned into beasts due to the blood moon's accelerated beast transformation effect. But they didn't care. The healing church wanted to experiment blood healing on the population of old Yharnam. However, the experiments went out of control and it eventually led to old Yharnam being burned down. When the hunt began, the healing church left us, blocking the great bridge to Cathedral Ward, as old Yharnam burned to the ground that moonlit night. Notice how this note says the hunt began. However, that's not quite accurate because the night of old Yharnam incident was not the night when the first hunt was conducted. However, consider the person who wrote this note probably a regular Yharnamite who lived in Yharnam and only knew of what they saw. I think that this Yharnamite was referring to the night that the healing church began to officially hunt beasts as the hunt began. So I think that the old Yharnam incident was the first time that the healing church formally identified the beast as a huge threat and set out to use hunters to eradicate them. Anyway, important point about the old Yharnam incident is that despite it being the first incident when the healing church formally got involved in, I don't think it involved the healing church's first hunter, Ludwig. We hear about Ludwig a lot from weapons like Ludwig's Holy Blade and Ludwig's rifle. However, we don't really find any evidence that he participated during the Old Yharnam incident. We never meet Ludwig, but if his weapons are anything to go by, it's clear that he had a thoughtful and methodological style to dealing with the beasts. That just doesn't fit in with burning down the entire city. However, there were a group of hunters who fit in very well with his style. So I think at that time the Healing Church didn't have any hunters, but they had heard about the powder kegs. The church had a huge beast problem in Old Yharnam, so they employed the powder kegs to put a stop to it. However, there were so many beasts that even the powder kegs felt overwhelmed. The red moon hangs low, and the beasts rule the street. Are we left with no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? The powder kegs decided that they had no other choice but to burn Old Yharnam down. However, there was one powder keg who was reluctant to accept this decision. Jura. Jura had just discovered from the Healing Church that Gehrman had been keeping an important piece of information hidden from him.
In case you fail to realize, the things you hunt, they're not beasts. They're people.
This caused Jura to have a breakdown. He didn't want to kill people, yet he had been killing them all along. He was also shocked that the other powder kegs were okay with burning down Old Yharnam. He wanted to stop them, but the powder kegs weren't the kind of people who waited patiently to execute a plan. When they had decided on a plan, they executed it immediately. Within hours, all of Old Yharnam had been burnt to the ground. Jura was devastated and returned to the hunter's dream. He confronted Gehrman and lashed out at him for hiding information for him. He then renounced his hunter vows. He said he would no longer hunt beasts, and that he would even try to stop anyone who tried to hunt beasts, including Gehrman. However, Gehrman didn't take that lightly.
Dear, oh dear. What was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
After saying that, Gehrman fought Jura and defeated Jura. He then cut Jura's connection with the hunter's dream, and Jura woke outside in Yharnam to the sunrise of Old Yharnam. However, Jura realized that not all hope had been lost. Not all the beasts of Old Yharnam had been killed. He could still protect them from the remaining powder kegs. According to the charge hunter said, we do know that there were hunters, probably powder kegs, who went after the beast even after the Old Yharnam incident. Deciding that it was worthwhile to kill people who threatened the lives of innocents, Jura went down and killed almost every single member of the powder kegs which he could find. There was one member which he spared. That member begged for forgiveness, I guess, and when Jura arrived to kill him, and Jura, still being kind at heart, decided to give him another chance. That forgiven powder keg is the ally of Jura that we find in Old Yharnam today. In the meantime, the church had lost the powder kegs, but the threat of the beast remained. Beasthood was becoming a problem inside the Healing Church especially. According to the Sword Hunter badge, clerics of the Healing Church turned into the most hideous beasts. That's when the Healing Church decided to establish their own hunters under the command of a man named Ludwig. Ludwig employed the local Yharnamites to join and became a famous hunter overall. There are some notable differences between Ludwig's hunters and Gehrman's hunters. Ludwig's hunters had no access to the hunter's dream, as they were not associated with the moon presence in any way. Ludwig's hunters also had bigger weapons, and that was because they weren't just cleaning up streets of the beasts, but also cleaning up the beasts that members of the Healing Church, such as the clerics, turned into. These beasts were far bigger and dangerous than any of the beasts in Central Yharnam, so they required heftier weapons. Now let's go back to the days of early Byrgenwerth. With news about the Great Ones and the Eldritch Wisdom began to pour from expeditions in the Talich dungeons, there was one student in Byrgenwerth who was more fascinated than any of the others. This student was Caryll, who was studying hard to become a scholar. We know that Caryll was initially a student, as he's referred to as one in the Ruin Workshop tool's description. Later on, he became the runesmith of Byrgenwerth, as is stated in almost every Caryll ruin. Caryll had the ability to hear the voices of the Great Ones and etch them into ruins. But how did he gain that ability? Well, I think it's because he spent a lot of time in the Chalice dungeons. He explored them from top to bottom. He was exposed to much eldritch stuff, and eldritch stuff increases our insight. Notice how when our insight increases, we begin to see and hear the more eldritch aspects of the games. Well, I think it was similar with Caryll. If you examine their item placement, you'll notice that the most powerful Caryll ruins are all located in the Root Chalice dungeons. So I think Caryll got a lot of insight from there and was able to craft the best Caryll ruins there because the Chalice dungeons was the best place to hear the Great Ones. Anyway, there was something in the Chalice dungeons which the Healing Church had forbidden. The blood of the dead Queen Yharnam. The Healing Church had heard rumors about how her blood was powerful but cursed by the Great Ones. They didn't want to use it, but they didn't want anyone else to be using it either, so they forbade anyone from using it. However, Caryll had other plans. After crafting runes for the Healing Church for years, he decided he no longer liked the Healing Church. The Healing Church was too pretentious. They were only interested in gaining knowledge by hook or by crook. Caryll wanted more than to just gain knowledge. He really wanted to be revered by the Great Ones and establish a genuine relationship with them. The Healing Church wasn't interested in helping him with that endeavor, but Caryll knew a place that would. His own homeland of Cainhurst. Some of you may be wondering why I decided that Caryll is the traitor. It's kind of hard to pinpoint him, but I think there are enough clues to reasonably determine that he's the most likely culprit. For starters, let's take a look at the item placement of the Ruin Workshop tool. Notice how the Ruin Workshop tool is located on a dead hunter in Hemwick. Hemwick is the bridge between Yharnam and Cainhurst. I think the dead hunter we see was someone who was loyal to Caryll and was bringing the Ruin Workshop tool, which was originally Caryll's tool, back to his homeland of Cainhurst from the Hunter's Dream. The tool is described to be a misplaced hunter's tool, so I think this hunter stole it from the hunter's dream. This can explain why the hunter is found dead in Hemwick. He was probably killed by the witches of Hemwick and had his connection to the hunter's dream cut by Gehrman, who branded him as a traitor for stealing the Ruin Workshop tool. With no hunter's dream to revive him, the hunter was left as a corpse in Hemwick. Now let's take a look at what Alfred says.
There's something I want to tell you. A bit of wisdom from the eminent master Logarius. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Byrgenwerth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Cainhurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vile Bloods was born. The Vile Bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing.
Over here, Alfred is quoting Master Logarius, but notice how he refers to the traitor as simply a scholar of Byrgenwerth rather than as runesmith Caryll. I think the reason for this is because Caryll betraying the Healing Church came as a real shock to them and as a massive blow to their PR. I mean, Caryll had constructed all of their ruins, so I think the higher-ups in the Healing Church, like Logarius, only reveal some of the information about the traitor in order to prevent any kind of public confusion or outcry. Anyway, I think Caryll took the forbidden blood back to Cainhurst Castle because he wanted the people of Cainhurst, his people, to become the Neo-Pthumerians. He wanted them to succeed when the Pthumerians did it. The Pthumerians were very successful in their endeavors with the Great Ones, but there was one area where they weren't very successful, and that was in providing a special child to the Great Ones. When Caryll returned to Cainhurst, he implanted Queen Yharnam's blood into Princess Annalise's body. The superhuman Pthumerian blood granted Annalise immortality and allowed her to use her own blood to create the Vile Bloods. The Vile Bloods were an elite group that was designed to find anything that could help Annalise give birth to a special child. As the ages passed, the Vile Bloods focused on hunting hunters, as they provided them with blood dregs, substances which Annalise found helped her the most in giving birth to a special child. Since the blood dregs were so useful in this matter, the Vile Bloods decided to refer to the special child as the Child of Blood. Caryll also crafted an Old Caryll rune for the Vile Bloods and gave it to Annalise to distribute to all current and future Vile Bloods. The existence of the Old Caryll rune is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Caryll was involved in Cainhurst at some point. Caryll had crafted runes specifically for the church, like the Radiance runes and the Communion rune, so if he was also crafting a rune specifically for the Vile Bloods, then it suggests that Caryll wasn't always loyal to the Healing Church. The corruption rune also allowed the Vilebloods to continuously heal when they were near death. The healing church was shocked by what Caryll was able to do for the Vilebloods. The Vilebloods didn't even need blood vials to heal. They just needed to be a Vileblood. That threatened the appeal of the healing church. The Vilebloods soon also started slaughtering the healing church hunters for blood dregs. The healing church knew if they were to survive the competition, they had to take out the Vilebloods. So eventually, a war broke out between Cainhurst and the healing church. However, this war for the most part wasn't very successful at putting an end to the Vilebloods. Soon the healing church found out that the Vilebloods had an ally. That ally was making trouble for the healing church while making sure that there was no trouble at Cainhurst. That ally was the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence had noticed Caryll's desire to befriend the Great Ones. However, the surviving Great Ones weren't interested because they still had a grudge against Caryll for disturbing the peace of the deceased Great Ones by exploring the Chalice dungeons. So the Moon Presence decided to answer Caryll's desire instead, because she saw how an alliance with him could benefit her. Caryll would agree to persuade Annalise into getting the Vilebloods to slaughter more of the Healing Church hunters and to ignore Gehrman's hunters. That would make everything easier for the Moon Presence, who was using Gehrman's hunters to gather blood echoes for her own consumption. In return, the Moon Presence would not use the Blood Moon's effects in Cainhurst. That's what we see in game. Even after we unleash the Blood Moon, we still don't see it in Cainhurst and a couple of other places. Basically, we only see the Blood Moon in Yharnam and the areas that were all connected to the Healing Church. We don't see it anywhere else, and that to me suggests that the Blood Moon only affects places which the Moon Presence views as her enemy. Since the Blood Moon accelerates beast transformation, it is a weapon to be used by the Moon Presence against her enemies. Since she doesn't have any beef against Cainhurst, she has no reason to endanger them. In fact, I believe the Moon Presence tried her best to stop the scourge of the beast from affecting Cainhurst. I do think occasionally the beasts from nearby Yharnam have attacked Cainhurst, but I doubt that the people of Cainhurst ever actually turned into beasts as a result of blood healing. I mean, Cainhurst is one of the few locations in the game where we don't find a single beast. The Moon Presence had a huge impact on Cainhurst. I believe it provided them with the eldritch knowledge needed to advance the technology in Cainhurst. Cainhurst developed this exclusive item called a numbing mist. Its effect is to prevent enemies from healing themselves. I can't help notice that its effect is very similar to two techniques which the Moon Presence uses when we fight her. These two techniques can stop our blood healing, but what I think is most telling are the official name of these two techniques that are provided in the guidebook: Numbing Cloudburst and Numbing Shower. So the Moon Presence has the techniques Numbing Cloudburst and Numbing Shower, which can stop us from recovering HP, and Cainhurst has the Numbing Mist, which can also stop us from recovering our HP. There's definitely a connection here. It's also clear that the people of Cainhurst explored the Pthumerian labyrinths. Cainhurst's weapons such as the Shikagi and the Reiter Palash can only be found in the Pthumerian labyrinths and not in any other challenge dungeon. I can understand the Cainhurst's decision to do that. They saw themselves as the Neo-Pthumerians, so they visited the Pthumerian labyrinths as much as possible so they could gain inspiration from them as to who they were supposed to be. I think what they saw in the labyrinth really shaped who they became. According to the Night Set, Cainhurst is described to be a place of bombast and nostalgia. I think the nostalgia they're referring to is the ancient Pthumerian civilization. The lost children of antiquity, which are found in Cainhurst, for example, can also be found in the Pthumerian labyrinth. I guess the people of Cainhurst convinced some of them to join them by branding themselves as the Neo-Pthumerians. Those giant statues which we find in Cainhurst, I think, are also inspired by the Pthumerians. Remember, the Pthumerians were supposed to be tall humanoid figures, and these statues are pretty tall. A few of these statues are even identical to items we find in the Pthumerian labyrinth. I also think that there's evidence to suggest that the Crown of Illusions came from the Pthumerian labyrinth. I mean, the Crown of Illusions allows you to see stuff that wasn't there, and it's fine, it also allowed you to see more of the eldritch side of things. The Pthumerians could have easily created something like that since they had unlocked the wisdom of the eldritch truth. The Crown of Illusion also laid its weight to my theory that Caryll eventually became the King of Cainhurst and married Annalise. We know that there was clearly an active king in Cainhurst, as there's an empty throne right next to Annalise. The king had to wear this crown, which showed all this crazy cosmic otherworldly stuff. Think about which characters in Bloodborne are capable of experiencing so much crazy cosmic stuff and not going insane. The only character who I can think of is Caryll, who was able to transcribe the voices of the Great Ones into Caryll runes. Anyway, I think one of the reasons why the people of Cainhurst travel to the Pthumerian labyrinths a lot is because the moon presence encouraged them to. I mean, the surviving Great Ones didn't want anyone to enter the labyrinths. I don't think Caryll or anyone from Cainhurst meant to displease the Great Ones, but I think they were deceived by the moon presence, who probably lied to them that their fellow Great Ones didn't mind. I'd even wager to guess and say that the moon presence had even used the Cainhurst to spy on the surviving Great Ones. One last thing I'd like to touch upon is what happens when we first enter Cainhurst. We gain insight. Wait, isn't that strange? Insight is a peek into the cosmic knowledge that has been made available in the physical world thanks to the dreaming world. I can understand why we gain insight when we discover the old abandoned workshop, because it reveals to us the inspiration behind the dreaming world of the Hunter's Dream. So why do we gain insight when we enter Cainhurst? Well, I think it's for the same reason. I think the only reason for us to get insight when we enter a location in the physical plane is if it acts for an inspiration for something in the dreaming world. I think Cainhurst acted as an inspiration for the dreaming world in Caryll's head. I mean, the moon presence was communicating with him, so she needed a dream to communicate with him. Thus, she used Caryll's own dream of Cainhurst Castle. I'd even go as far as to say that maybe the moon presence was even communicating in a separate dreaming world with Annalise, because entering a Queen Annalise's chamber also grants you insight, so it was being used as inspiration for another dreaming world. Now let's return to the story of Master Willem at Byrgenwerth. He was evolving his students into Gardens of Eyes, and some of the Gardens of the Eyes even evolved into the false god Amygdalas. All the eyes that were harvested were used for researching the eyes on the inside, and soon Willem was able to really increase his insight until he was finally able to connect his mind to the cosmos. However, when Willem peered into the cosmos, he found it to be pretty empty. In reality, only the moon presence resided in the cosmos, and she didn't really have any interest in Willem. Or at least that was the case until something happened which threatened her, something which only Willem could stop. Most of Willem's students were only able to become false gods, but what Willem wanted more than anything else was to turn one of them into a legitimate Great One. That finally happened when one of his students turned into Rom, the vacuous spider. Willem finally had someone to share his cosmic knowledge with. However, Willem wasn't the only person that Rom communicated with. Rom was soon contacted by the surviving Great Ones, who asked her for assistance. The surviving Great Ones were hashing a plan. Initially, the surviving Great Ones believed that Udin was the reason for the Great One Massacre. They believed he was the one who had brought the curse of blood healing to the waking world. However, blood healing still hadn't died out despite Udin being dead for ages. Users of blood healing were still able to raid the Chalice dungeons. The Great Ones decided to investigate further, and they found out that every night the blood moon was still out over Yharnam. However, Udin was formless. The blood moon couldn't have been his doing. Only the moon presence could have been responsible for the blood moon. The Great Ones initially believed that the moon presence had been killed in the Great One Massacre, but seeing the blood moon out every night over central Yharnam had convinced him otherwise. The moon presence had been alive all this time, hiding in the cosmos. She was the one who was responsible for all the suffering the Great Ones had endured. With that newfound realization, the surviving Great Ones decided to put a stop to her. The first thing they needed to do was to stop her from exerting her power over the waking world, and they needed Rom to do that. Given their account of what had happened, it wasn't difficult to convince Rom. Right after Rom had made a pact with the surviving Great Ones, the moon presence contacted Willem. Willem was glad to have finally made contact by a Great One. However, the moon presence wasn't interested in it making any genuine discussion. Instead, she planted lies inside Willem's mind. She deceived Willem into believing that the surviving Great Ones were the bad guys, and they had indoctrinated Rom into doing evil things. As Willem was a lesser being, it wasn't too difficult to deceive him. However, Willem's decision to go with the moon presence came too late. Rom used her eldritch powers, and for the first time in ages, the blood moon was blocked. Less people turned into harmful beasts. It should also be noted that there were other benefits to Rom's spell. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals. Basically, this note is lamenting the fact that Rom made it impossible to conduct a chalice ritual. You can't enter a chalice dungeon without conducting a chalice ritual. That fitted in with how the Great Ones didn't want any more annoying church followers to enter the tombs of their deceased brethren. After the success of Rom, the Great Ones began making their next move, but in order to understand that, we have to take a look at the School of Mensis. At that time, the School of Mensis was run by some crazy guy named Micolash. When we meet him in the present, he has some comments about Rom.
as you once did for the vacuous Rom. Grant us eyes, grant us eyes.
It almost sounds like Micolash has some jealousy for Rom being able to successfully evolve. I think this jealousy started when he found out that Rom had successfully ascended. I think that's when Micolash decided to let his ego get the best of him. That's when he decided to break a law of the Healing Church. He decided to turn to the blood moon of the cosmos in order to make contact with the cosmos. Now let's take a look at the relationship of the upper stratums of the Healing Church that was composed of the choir and the School of Mensis. Both the choir of Upper Cathedral Ward and the School of Mensis of Yahar Ghul had a common goal of making contact with the cosmos, the realm of the Great Ones. They were basically allowed to use whatever means necessary to achieve this goal, but there was one notable exception. Neither of them was allowed to make contact with the blood moon. Why? Well, because the Healing Church had figured out that there was some sort of connection between the blood moon and the Vile Bloods. The blood moon accelerated the beast transformations of blood users in Yharnams. That caused a lot of problems for the Healing Church. However, the Healing Church's spies reported that there was no such effect in Cainhurst as the blood moon was absent there. I don't think the Healing Church had all the details, but they suspected that there was some sort of connection between the Vile Bloods and the blood moon, and that was enough for them to deem the blood moon to be blasphemous. However, Micolash had exhausted all his options trying to contact the cosmos. Contacting the blood moon was the only thing he hadn't tried. Above all this, he felt that Rom was hiding something as she had hidden the blood moon, so Micolash decided he had to somehow beacon the blood moon. Initially, Micolash tried to achieve this goal in private. Madmen toiled surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, uncover their secrets. Judging by the state of present-day Yahar Ghul, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people perished in Micolash's crazy secret rituals to beacon the blood moon. Eventually, I think Micolash decided that the cosmic entity behind the blood moon had to be a Great One. Since these crazy rituals didn't work, he decided to use the old-fashioned method of summoning a Great One. From the information obtained from the Chalice dungeons, Micolash had heard about how Great Ones were all destined to lose their children and wanted a special child as a surrogate. Micolash decided to use one, judging by this note. Nightmares rituals crave a newborn. Find one and silence its harrowing cry. I think this was written as a pretty dark demand by the people of Yahar Ghul. I mean, nobody wanted the blood moon back, so they were pretty much asking you or anyone else who read this note to go and kill any special child you could find so the Micolash could get no special child to beacon the blood moon with. Unfortunately, Micolash was successful in finding a special child named Murgo. I'm not certain if Murgo was a human child or some Pthumerian child that Micolash kidnapped from the Labyrinth. Either way, Murgo did end up catching the attention of the cosmic entities. But the cosmic entities were not the moon presence. Micolash wanted to call the moon presence, but the moon presence didn't care about children. She used her own son Udin and then just forgot about him. Murgo could never call the moon presence. However, Murgo could beacon the surviving Great Ones. The surviving Great Ones took Murgo, but quite ironically, they didn't really take Murgo as their surrogate child. Instead, they sold Murgo as their ticket to taking down the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence was in the cosmos, so in order for them to attack the Moon Presence for revenge, they needed to go to the cosmos. However, the only way they could go to the cosmos was by taking a passageway through the dreaming world from a contract dream. But the only person who could create a contact dream was a special child, and Murgo was a special child. It's strongly implied that the surviving Great Ones didn't really treat Murgo that well. For one thing, Murgo is crying throughout the entire game. We just can't hear it unless we have enough insight. Queen Yharnam's ghost is also going after Murgo and seems to show pathos towards him or her. After you kill Murgo, Queen Yharnam bows to you as thanks. Even the guidebook implies that she's thanking you for putting the baby Murgo out of his or her misery. Queen Yharnam's ghost is a bit of a funny character. I don't think she's actually on anyone's side, but her interests seem to serve the moon presences more than the Great Ones. I think Queen Yharnam just doesn't want the Great Ones to ruin the life of another baby. I mean, they had killed her baby, so that's an understandable desire. And she is right, because Murgo's wet nurse and the other surviving Great Ones seem to be doing a pretty bad job if Murgo is crying throughout the entire game. When the surviving Great Ones set out to retrieve Micolash's special child, I think Queen Yharnam's ghost went to warn the School of Mensis to not give Murgo up. In order to stop her, the surviving Great Ones had Rom seal her away. I'll also take a moment to explain my interpretation of Murgo's identity. Murgo's identity is another ambiguity in the series. Redgrave believes Murgo is Udin, others believe that he or she is an infant Great One. However, I believe that he's either a special human child or special Pthumerian child. Why don't I believe Murgo is a Great One? Well, it's because of what's written at the beginning of several Caryll ruins. It's stated that the Caryll ruins are transcriptions of the inhuman voices of the Great Ones. Think about that. Inhuman voices of the Great Ones. Murgo doesn't have an inhuman voice. Murgo sounds like a human baby crying. Murgo sounds very human. So I don't think Murgo can be a Great One who are described to have inhuman voices. I'm not sure if it's ever suggested whose child Murgo is. I doubt it's Queen Yarnum. Some people have speculated that Gascoigne might have had some relationship with Murgo, as his favorite song is Murgo's Lullaby. Like maybe Murgo was another child of Gascoigne that he had with another lady. Anyway, let's return to Micolash. He was thoroughly disappointed when he discovered that Murgo had been taken away without granting him any sort of insight. He wasn't entirely sure what had happened, only knew that there were some Great Ones that had taken Murgo and given him nothing in return. Micolash still needed to find a way to beacon the Blood Moon. So he did some more research and stumbled upon some more information about the Blood Moon. The Blood Moon had first been beaconed by the ancient cosmic artifact known as the One-Third of the Umbilical Cord. Fortunately, Micolash had one of those from an earlier expedition to the Chalice Dungeons. He used it, and it did grant him audience with Murgo, but it resulted in the stillbirth of his brain and the brains of the rest of the School of Mensis. The reason why the surviving Great Ones allowed Micolash to have audience with Murgo is because they wanted the One-Third of the Umbilical Cord. They knew that consuming that item could grant them with the power needed to surpass the moon presence. When they saw Micolash wavering it around, they knew they had to go get it. However, I would like to point out that the surviving Great Ones allowing Micolash to have audience with Murgo wasn't really out of sincere interest. Rather, I think they wanted to use Micolash for their own purposes in a similar way to how they used Murgo. They probably promised Micolash that he would evolve to the same level as Rob as long as he did what they said. Before I go any further, I would like to add that I believe the surviving Great Ones did take steps to ensure that nobody would disturb Micolash's ritual. I think the real Amygdala took control of all the false god Amygdalas and used them to stop people from entering Yahar Ghul. Due to Ram's spell, the false god Amygdalas were also called invisible to those with little insight. Remember how I said only a special child could create a dreaming world via a contract dream using a host? I think the surviving Great Ones decided Micolash was to be the host of the dreaming world that Murgo was to create. This is obvious by Micolash's title, which denotes him as the host of the nightmare. It's also evident by how the nightmare appears. Much like how the hunter's dream is a projection of Gehrman's mind, the nightmare is a projection of Micolash's mind. Judging by the statues in Yahar Ghul, it's clear that Micolash had a very unique idea of anatomy. We find that unique idea in the nightmare as well. The nightmare is also located in Loran, the place where the Great Ones first made contact with the humans. Except that it's not an entirely accurate representation of Loran, just like how any dream isn't an accurate representation of reality. Micolash is basically trying to help the Great Ones, so he tailors his projection of Loran to a way that's favorable to the Great One. He does this by doing things like having all the Loran beasts either missing or dead. The Loran silver beasts which we encounter in the nightmare are dead, and they're only able to move around because the parasite larvae are infesting them. In comparison, we see that the Loran silver beasts in the Loran labyrinths are actually alive because no parasite larvae come out of their mouth after we kill them. We also get a very negative impression of the doll and the messengers in the nightmare. We see them recreated in this grotesque form, and that makes sense because they're allied with the moon presence, so the surviving Great Ones would have a negative impression of them. Anyway, the other Great Ones such as Amygdala and the Brain of Mensis are standing guard while Murgo's wet nurse is launching an attack on the moon presence. We know this because the area where Murgo is located is called the wet nurse's lunarium. The only other person who has a lunarium in the game is Master Willem, and he was always trying to make contact with the moon. However, the wet nurse isn't like friend with the moon presence or whatever, so the only reason why she would want to make contact with the moon presence is if she wanted to attack her. Anyway, that's when the player's hunt begins. The Moon Presence is under attack by Murgo's wet nurse, whose swift arcane-based attacks do a great job of countering the Moon Presence's slow and clumsy combat style. The Moon Presence knows that if Murgo was endangered, the wet nurse would return to protect her, because the Great Ones feared that without a special child, the nightmare would collapse. So the Moon Presence has Gehrman task us to hunt down baby Murgo without us even realizing it. Now, there are a lot of little side stories going on in the game. I won't go into detail with them because this analysis is already long enough and I'm pretty sure most of you are already aware of the basic details. Instead, I'll just point out the most important details that I noticed. There are a few items that mention left behind Great Ones. I just think they're referring to the surviving Great Ones who felt left behind after they discovered that the Moon Presence had betrayed them. The Moon Presence was supposed to be their brethren, but she backstabbed all of them just so she could go ahead with her goals. The interesting thing about the kidnappers is that I don't think they work for the School of Mensis. Rather, I think they're a group of Pthumerians who infiltrated Yahar'gul and took it over. There are a few main reasons why I believe this. The first reason is because the kidnappers' role to kidnap is already being fulfilled by another group in Yahar'gul. The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers blend into the night wearing this attire. So the Yahar'gul hunters were the ones who went around kidnapping people for Micolash's crazy experiments. It wasn't the kidnappers. The second reason is that Adela didn't seem to know who the kidnappers were. She just refers to them as brutes. If the School of Medicines did work as part of the Healing Church, you would normally expect the other church members to recognize their employees. Let's also take a logical look at the appearance of the kidnappers. After you've killed the blood-starved beast, the kidnappers start appearing throughout Cathedral Ward. This unlocks the passageway to the Healing Church, a workshop, the abandoned workshop, and the upper Cathedral Ward via a door in Udin Chapel. And all that suggests is that they were involved in those places earlier. I mean, if the door was locked and it became unlocked after they started appearing, then it means that they were doing something there earlier and that's why the door was locked. I think the kidnappers were trying to bring Ebrietas back to the Chalice dungeons and her fellow surviving Great Ones. They were looking for an opportunity to rescue her ever since Laurence and his associates had kidnapped Ebrietas, and they decided to seize the opportunity when they saw that the Scourge of Beasts had devastated Yharnam. However, the kidnappers also couldn't allow the Pthumerian Chalice to fall back into human hands.
Most of the holy chalices lie deep within the tomb of the gods. And the few that found their way to the surface were lost again in the hands of men. But if the old hunter tales remain true, one of the holy chalices is worshipped in the valley hamlet.
What happens after you kill the blood-starved beast? You obtain the Pthumerian Chalice. The kidnappers probably sensed that with their Pthumerian powers and set out to capture anyone who they suspected of either having the chalice or having knowledge of its location. This can explain why they captured Healing Church members like Adela. All of this fits in with how there's a dead blood-starved beast hanging in the old Yharnam building. There's a ritual blood right next to this dead blood-starved beast. The guide confirms that this building is called the Ritual Hall, so it's obvious that whoever killed this beast was trying to get the Pthumerian Chalice out of it, but they ended up killing the wrong blood-starved beast. Anyway, the third reason why I believe the kidnappers aren't working with the School of Mensis is because after the Blood Moon is out, we find that all the kidnappers are dead. Considering that they were Pthumerians who were working alongside the surviving Great Ones, it isn't difficult to imagine why the Moon Presence would use her beast to finish them off. Finally, I'd like to add that it seems that the chap Samaritan is on good relations with the kidnappers. I mean, if the kidnappers really unlocked the door in Udin Chapel and exited from there, then the Samaritan would have definitely noticed. However, he never alerts us or anything, and that implies that he didn't find them alarming or anything. It's like, you know, he considered them to be friendly and whatnot, and them just walking by was okay by him. This makes sense because I guess it would be easy for the kidnappers to talk to the Samaritan and tell him to not make a fuss to anyone. I mean, the Samaritan is all about saving people, and since the kidnappers seem to be on a mission to save Ebrietas, it would be very easy for them to get the Samaritan's trust. In the nightmare, we find an enemy which the guidebook names as the Giant Lost Child. But whose child is it? Well, there are two other giant enemies in the game, so let's try to figure it out. If we examine the stats of both the Church Giant and the Undead Giant and compare them with the stats of the Giant Lost Child, we can see that it's the Undead Giant whose stats bear a closer resemblance to the stats of the Giant Lost Child. They both have low bolt defense. However, the Church Giant has high bolt defense, so I think that disqualifies it as a candidate. Since the nightmare is a projection of Loran, I don't think it's difficult to figure out the lore behind the Giant Lost Child. During the Great One Massacre, the Loran beasts were wreaking havoc everywhere. The giants were also in grave danger because they were weak to the Loran beasts' bolt attacks. So I think the adult giants hid their children, and these children survived the massacre. Unfortunately, their parents didn't. They were killed by the Loran beasts. However, their parents were revived by the Pthumerians using the wisdom of their newfound eldritch knowledge. Unfortunately, the giants' parents were now zombies that served only the Pthumerians. The Pthumerians employed the revived giants to help them guard the challenge dungeons. Since the giants' parents were taken away from their children, the children felt lost, and these children became the giant lost children that we see in the nightmare today. According to Alfred, it was the Healing Church who made the woods forbidden. It's obvious why they did that as well. They were probably using it for their secret experiments. That's why we find celestial emissaries there. It's also why we find the blue elixir there. The blue elixir can numb the brain, so it's really important for experiments. We also find the White Church Hunter set there. I'd even go as far as to say that the imposter Iosefka was originally one of the White Church members conducting research there. I guess after she ran out of specimen in the Forbidden Woods, she decided to take over Iosefka's clinic. However, there's something which is difficult to explain with just Healing Church research. It's the existence of these Medusa-headed huntsmen. Why would the Healing Church do experiments like that? Turning huntsmen into becoming Medusa-headed huntsmen is more akin to the kind of experiments that Micolash would do. However, why would the School of Mensis choose to do an experiment in the Forbidden Woods when all their other experiments are clearly in Yahar'gul? I think the answer lies with the Afflicted Beggar once again. I think he's been ravaging the villages in the Forbidden Woods for quite some time. Many of the huntsmen in the Forbidden Woods would probably want to get rid of him. However, the Afflicted Beggar's abhorrent beast form is pretty strong. However, it does have a crucial weakness: slow poison. The abhorrent beast has pretty low slow poison defense. Notice how the Medusa-headed huntsmen can inflict slow poison? They can even summon snake balls that can inflict slow poison. So I think what happened is that these huntsmen wanted a quick way of killing the abhorrent beast. The abhorrent beast was also quite weak to arcane, but the huntsmen didn't have time to spend years on studying arcane. However, they found out that the School of Mensis were looking for specimens to test their snake parasite on, so they volunteered. However, I do think that the snake parasite did end up spreading more than it was supposed to. The shadows of Yharnam that we find in the Forbidden Woods have been affected with it as well, despite the fact that they had no interest in the local villages. Ultimately, I do think that all the slow poison inflicting snake creatures did scare the Afflicted Beggar, because when you meet him in the present day, he asks us if we know any safe place. However, I must add that there's still one thing I don't understand about the Forbidden Woods. There are giant tombstones in the area. It's never explained why they're here, but we do find this underground area which also has giant tombstone that is styled similar to the Altar of Despair. It looks like a bunch of church giants are praying over the graves of their deceased brethren. That can help explain the giant tombstones in the Forbidden Woods. So I'm guessing there was some kind of giant slaughter in the Forbidden Woods, which would make sense because we do find a cannon, which is a weapon crafted specifically to take out giant opponents in the Forbidden Woods. However, I can't really work out the context behind such an event. There are three things I'd like to say about Alfred. First, I think this guy grew up in Old Yharnam. The reason for this is because he always blesses you with the good blood. There's a church in Old Yharnam known as the Church of the Good Chalice. I think that all the saying of the good blood originated from that church. This makes sense because other than Alfred, no other member of the Healing Church mentions the good blood, and Dylan never says it, so I think it's something exclusive to people who attended the Church of the Good Chalice. Another thing I like to add is that the Bloodstar Feast we find in the Old Yharnam resides in the Church of the Good Chalice, and we can summon Alfred to aid us in that fight, and that suggests that he has a connection to that place. This all brings me to my second point. Alfred looks like he's in his 30s, and so using his age, I think we can estimate how long ago Old Yharnam was burned down. I'd say around 30 to 35 years ago was when the city was burned. I think Alfred went to the Church of the Good Chalice as a kid, and that's why he's familiar with the area as an adult. I guess he and his family fled to central Yharnam when the Ashen Blood plague broke out. The last thing I'd like to point out is how Alfred killed Anneliese. Remember, Anneliese's throne room was hidden by an illusion that could have only have been broken by a crown of illusions. However, we didn't give him our crown of illusions, we just gave him the Cainhurst summons. So how did Alfred get to a room? Well, it's because he has his own crown of illusions that we find by his corpse. Now, the obvious question is, how did Alfred get another crown of illusions? Well, I think he obtained it from the healing church that raided it from the Pthumerian labyrinth. I believe that the Crown of Illusions was originally a Pthumerian artifact, so I think a few of them were available in the Pthumerian labyrinths. Eileen is actually from Cainhurst, judging by her stats. The one thing you'll notice about pretty much everyone from Cainhurst, and in every Cainhurst set, is that their blood defense is their single highest stat. The only exception is Anneliese, and that's a bit strange, but I guess it's because it's related to how she's the source of the vile bloods. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that the 49 Eileen came from is Cainhurst. I think Eileen may have had a rather strained relationship with her homeland Cainhurst. Eileen is all about not becoming addled with blood, but Cainhurst was all about relishing in blood. I mean, the Cainhurst Knights were required to kill hunters to get blood dregs for Anneliese. It's possible that Eileen may have played a role in the Cainhurst Massacre. I'm also guessing that the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, whom she has a grudge with, is her former student who became addled with blood. Iosefka and her impostor are from Cainhurst, as their blood defense is their single highest stat. It's also interesting to note that imposter Iosefka is the only character other than Anneliese to identify your scent as connected to the moon. Both of those characters are from Cainhurst, so I think their ability to identify our smell also acts as further evidence that the moon presence was working with Cainhurst. Anyway, I'm not sure why Iosefka and her imposter look identical, maybe they're just twin sisters. But anyway, it's obvious that they both at least once worked for the Healing Church. What's interesting about Iosefka's clinic is that when you enter it from the back, you gain insight. That means it's being used as the basis of a dreaming world. This does make sense because imposter Iosefka is turning everyone into celestial emissaries. We also find that Iosefka's blood vial is located in the nightmare, so I think it's clear that Iosefka was perhaps trying to make contact with the Great Ones in the nightmare, or maybe even the moon presence. She is from Cainhurst, so it would be plausible if she would know of a way to contact the moon presence. Ultimately, I think Iosefka may have wanted to give birth to a surrogate child, but we make sure she doesn't do that. I also like to point out that our Cainhurst summons is described to be old and bloodstained. Now, a big question is, who sent us this letter? It clearly wasn't Anneliese, as she makes no mention of it, and also because she was imprisoned in her throne room. I think the most likely candidate is the real Iosefka. I think that the real Iosefka wanted us to go to Cainhurst and free her queen Anneliese. Bearing that in mind, it would make sense for our Cainhurst summons to be old and bloodstained. I mean, Iosefka was dealing with blood all the time, so it would make sense for a letter she would write to be bloodstained. It also makes sense for her to write the letter well before we arrived at the clinic, so that we would still have a path to Cainhurst even if something happened to her. Strangely enough, that ended up being the case. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame, and it makes my head shudder uncontrollably. Some people have speculated that the master referred to in this note is Willem, but I don't agree with that. I think it was Laurence, as Laurence was seen as a master by the Healing Church. Here to the ritual of blood, purveyor of ministration. Place your head on the altar's sacred covering and inscribe Master Laurence's adage upon your flesh. What this message is referring to is how Rom, the Byrgenwerth spider, blocked all the rituals in Yharnam. That means nobody could go to the chalice dungeon because nobody could conduct a chalice ritual, and that means nobody could retrieve the rest of Laurence's body. I think the Healing Church wanted to retrieve the rest of Laurence's body for a while, and I think they sent a lot of tomb prospectors down to do it. However, they always failed because they were unaware that a parasite larva had taken control of Laurence's body. A parasite larva is one of the worst opponents that a tomb prospector or any other member of the Healing Church could face. They're strong against arcane damage, and the Healing Church members specialize in arcane damage. We also know that the parasite larva plays an active role if we decide to fight Laurence's beastly body. So I think that the church members kept getting hammered by the parasite lava, and that's why even till the present day they still haven't been able to retrieve Laurence's body. It's interesting to note that Yahar Ghul, unlike the cathedral ward, has statues of the real Amygdala and not the false god Amygdalas. I think the School of Mensis did this to distinguish themselves from the choir and the rest of the healing church. They were probably saying something like, "We're worshipping the real gods, come join us," to everyone. There's a bunch of information we get about the messengers in the game. They love hunters, they tend not to sell church attire, they also love adornments, which suggests that the reason why they don't sell many of the church attires is because they love playing around in church attire and don't want to sell it. The messengers also act like babies when wearing adornments. They want blood echoes and insight in return for the items they can provide. They want the hunter to prove themselves by having the right badge or whatever before they're willing to sell them items. Some naive messengers don't seem to know what the bandages of scourge victims are for, and some wear bloody ribbons to mourn for the victims of the scourge. The messengers seem to like the black church hunters' hats and the girly white ribbons. They don't like the beasts as they wear incest-filled urns. They like the dark, and their primary purpose seems to be to transport notes to other players. I think the messengers are manifestations of the childish innocence of the orphans that eventually created the choir. However, I don't think that all the orphans were children in Yharnam. I also believe that it's possible that some of the children of the orphanage were originally from Cainhurst, and that's why they were able to buy the knight set from them. However, this interpretation isn't perfect. The messengers also sell the Bone Ash set, which is the Pthumerian set. I have a tentative theory to explain this. There also seem to have been messengers during the time of Loran, judging by some of the statues in the Chalice dungeons. These messengers of Loran seem to have been warriors, as the statues are posed in militaristic stances, which suggests that they were quite different from the messengers of Yharnam that we see today. It's possible that some of these messengers are also serving in the Hunter's Dream, and that's why the Bone Ash set can be purchased from there. A popular theory on the forums is that the doll is a Great One, but I disagree with that theory for the same reason why I disagree that Murgo is a Great One. The Great Ones have inhuman voices, but the doll doesn't have an inhuman voice. She speaks like a regular person. So who is she then? Well, I think she's a Pthumerian. She's tall, humanoid, pale, and has superhuman powers. I'm not sure exactly on the identity of the Pthumerian lady she was based off. I'm also not sure what her relationship with Gehrman was. Judging by her caring nature, I think it's possible she was some Pthumerian nurse who used to treat Gehrman during the hunt in a similar way to how Iosefka helps us during our hunt. Other than that, I have no idea. I think there's more to Ashen Blood than meets the eye, and overall I'd say it's one of the most confusing aspects of the game. Let me explain. At the end of the Pale Blood hunt, Redgrave pointed out that there were certain characters such as the doll, Willem, and the kid that bleed this whitish blood instead of regular red blood. He concluded that pale blood could be interpreted to be this whitish blood that we see some characters bleed. However, I don't really agree with that interpretation. It's true that there are some characters that don't bleed normal red blood. However, they all don't really bleed pale blood either from what I can see. The doll and Willem bleed pale blood. However, the Bloodstarved Beast also bleeds a different blood, and I'm not sure if I would say that its blood is pale. However, I am pretty sure that the Chalice Dungeon Amygdala doesn't have pale blood. Its blood is pretty dark. I also don't agree with Redgrave's classification of the whitish blood. He suggested that pale blood was a sign of evolved and ascended beings. However, there are beings which aren't evolved and ascended and still have the whitish pale blood. For example, the Bloodstarved Beast isn't evolved in any way, it's just a beast, but it still has this whitish blood. I think it's better to classify this special blood as Ashen Blood rather than Pale Blood. All these different colors we see in the different colored blood can all be classified as Ashen. Ashen can be white, it can be gray, it can be black, or it can be a mix between the three. But wait, according to the antidote, the Ashen Blood was some kind of illness that inflicted poison. However, the characters we encounter with Ashen Blood clearly aren't inflicted with poison. In fact, the funny thing is that many of the characters with Ashen Blood have maximum poison defense. Many of the characters have either 999 slow poison defense, 999 rapid poison defense, or 999 defense for both types of poison. So what's the pattern here? What's the story here? Honestly, I don't know. I spent over a month trying to figure it out, but I couldn't. The Ashen Blood is probably one of the most, if not the most, confusing concept in Bloodborne in regards to the lore. I first thought that characters with the Ashen Blood eventually developed antibodies that gave them 999 poison defense, but that's not true because the fluorescent flower has Ashen Blood and it has pretty low defense. Murgo's Wet Nurse also seems to have Ashen Blood and its poison defense isn't max either. What's even more confusing is that some members of a certain type of enemy have Ashen Blood while other members don't, and vice versa. For example, the Bloodstarved Beast we find in Old Yharnam has Ashen Blood, however the Bloodstarved Beast we find in the Chalice dungeons don't. The Amygdala we find in the Chalice dungeon has Ashen Blood, however the Amygdala we find in the Nightmare doesn't. I'm fairly confident that this whitish blood that we're seeing is Ashen Blood. That can explain why the Bloodstarved Beast in Old Yharnam has it, while the Bloodstarved Beast in the Chalice dungeons doesn't. However, I can't figure out the logic behind why some creatures have it and others don't. Maybe one of you guys will have more luck than me at solving the mystery of Ashen Blood. So that's what I managed to make of the story of Bloodborne. I didn't manage to make sense of everything, but I did find figuring out what I could to be very satisfying. The Soul series' storytelling style is really effective, but I do think there are a few areas that could use improvement, particularly in Bloodborne. First, let's talk about the guidebook. The funny thing about the guidebook is that in a way, it's a bit counterintuitive to the series. The primary design concept in the Souls game is that nothing is given and everything is earned. However, with the guidebook, you're getting all the strategies to defeat all the enemies. However, I know that simply reading a strategy and executing it are two different skills, so there is still something for you to earn even after you've used the guidebook. I think the guidebook is useful for people like me who don't have the time to invest into playing the game for hundreds of hours and experimenting with what works and what doesn't. However, I don't think the guidebook should have exclusive information that's connected to the lore. For example, in Bloodborne, the enemy and character's stats have a lot to do with the lore, so I don't like how it's restricted to information in the guidebook. The way I see it, a guidebook should only be a shortcut to information that's already available in the game. I've also got some comments on how the general gameplay is in Bloodborne in regards to how it helped convey the story. Overall, I think it did a fairly good job of conveying story information to us. We were encouraged to play in a fast-paced, aggressive style from the start, and that helped highlight our role as the Moon Presence's hunter. The Great Ones also used techniques that helped us learn more about them, such as the Moon Presence using similar techniques to Cainhurst's Numbing Mist. However, I felt a bit disconnected when playing the game because some of the boss fights were a bit too easy. Some enemies like Murgo's Wet Nurse could have been defeated with a standard backstab attack. However, I think in a way that may have added to the atmosphere that the game was trying to go for. Lovecraft stories are all about the protagonist being insignificant, and the one thing you'll notice about Bloodborne is that there aren't really any flashy techniques you get to use, which really make your character stand out. While your enemies do get these extravagant powers, your own abilities are always portrayed in a fairly modest manner, even when you're at a high level. However, not having any kind of flashy, extremely difficult to execute technique to take down a Great One does kind of take away from some of their awe, so I don't know. I guess there are pros and cons to the approach that FromSoft took. Finally, I'd like to comment on Bloodborne's status as a Lovecraft story. I don't entirely agree with the classification of Bloodborne being a Lovecraft story. I think Bloodborne is a Lovecraft story on your first playthrough, as you don't really understand what's going on. However, after you play it over and over again, the Bloodborne story ceases to be a Lovecraft story because everything begins to make sense. At its core, the horror created by a Lovecraft story comes from the unknown. Lovecraft's creatures were terrifying because they were so otherworldly that the human protagonist couldn't understand them, their desires, their goals, or anything like that. In fact, the human protagonists were meaningless to them. However, that's not always the case in Bloodborne. At the start, when we can't even kill a Scourge Beast, we're insignificant. However, as we develop our skills, we're even able to take down Great Ones, something that goes against everything Lovecraft wrote. As we kill more Great Ones, we get to understand more of the story. As we read the item description and examine the level design and the gameplay, the story becomes a lot clearer. The clarity of understanding diminishes the initial Lovecraftian horror we felt when we played the game. So I don't think it's fair to say that Bloodborne is about submitting to terror like a traditional Lovecraft story would. I think Bloodborne is about conquering terror. It's about challenging Lovecraftian horror and bringing it to its knees. In a way, you could call Bloodborne an anti-Lovecraft story. And I think that really fits in with how the Soulscapes are always about how nothing is given and everything is earned. Remember guys, these are all just my opinions. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please help my channel grow by sharing this video with as many people as you can. Link it on forums, subreddits, and wherever else you can find. The next narrative mechanics will be on Batman Arkham Knight. I hope you join me next time. Have a great day.